I'm very excited about our conversation today, and Emma's flown all the way in from Paris, so we're excited to kind of tap into some of her knowledge. But before, before we jump in, I just want to set a bit of context. Just about a year ago, a little over a year ago, we were actually here at MAU last year, and my co-founder and our chief scientist at Aampe gave a talk with one of our colleagues about generating dynamic experiences with agentic infrastructure. That was in April, and it was extremely well received, and we got a lot of activity from that. In fact, Emma first and the Deezer team first found out about Aampe by watching a version of that was uploaded to YouTube. Just a few months later, we were giving a talk at a large retail conference in New York City, and the organizers actually told us, what does agentic mean? You shouldn't use that term. It doesn't mean anything to us. It won't resonate with the audience. Very strict about it. We ended up, persuading them that it was okay. And again, the talk was very well received. And just a few months after that, in September, the New York Times introduced the term to their readers. Of course, there's been this broader wave of generative AI that we've all experienced in the last few years. But very quickly, they introduced it to their readers, and very quickly now the term has become almost ubiquitous, right? So it's exciting to know that MAU can be right at the forefront of some of the evolution that's happening, but it's also really important at times like this to continue to pause and make sure we understand what we're going through, what we're experiencing. I think we're actually lucky enough to live directly in what I expect will be one of the greatest transformative evolutions of the century. Literally, we're on the back of one already, right? We're all just 30 or 40 years into personal computing, where we're all interacting digitally with businesses and managing them as business people, as marketers, as product people. And now we're going through a shift from what we call software 1.0, which is rules-based software, to what we call agentic software, where the software itself, or the infrastructure itself, has the agency to make tactical decisions and to operate on our behalf. Now, what we mean when we say rules-based is just that world of the fact that what we've done is put content online, and we've structured it in a way, and it's very passive, and it's reactive, and it follows our instructions and extremely deterministic, and we know it does exactly what we say it does. And what agentic means is that we don't do that. We don't set those determined, narrow, tactical rules. We allow instantiations of agents. We allow agents and we delegate to them under our guidance, so that the entire application experience can fluidly, dynamically learn from and shift in response to the user experience. And it's also important to just realize why that happened. It didn't just come out of nowhere. It came because as we went through that software eating the world evolution, we encountered and we developed and we evolved the typical stack that we all will use. Right? So we have all these systems that are generating data, and then we put in place different staging softwares and CDPs, and that allows us to get the data into place, and then we start to use it. We start to sort of decide, what does a new user need to experience in order to become engaged with our product and our business? And what does a user who's likely to go away need to experience? And then we make those decisions in forms of action layers, in push notifications, in emails, in the product itself, and all of that is automated. But when we say automation, what we're really just saying is it does exactly what we tell it to do. And then it does it in some surface, again, in the email inbox of the person. And this is where we've encountered the problem. We've all encountered the pain of having to give very specific determined instructions in order to kind of describe the experience of 100,000 or 1 million or 10 million people in the world. And this is a problem. This doesn't scale. We know the pain of having to kind of figure out exactly what data goes here, and then when we're going to send that onboarding message and how. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But for agentic to work, for it to be meaningful, what we really are saying is that it has to have the capability to be proactive. Traditional rules-based software is reactive. It's like our desktop computer that we had in the 90s and the early 2000s, where you would go to it and you would do something to it, right? And even some aspects of generative AI, the chatbots of the world, are reactive. You prompt them and then they give something back. But as marketers, our job is to communicate with people in a very busy world. They have a lot of things going on, and we don't know exactly when to interact with them, but we know that what we have provides value to them, and so we're trying to figure it out. And so for agents to do that on our behalf, they have to have that ability to be proactive. And what that means is there's a lot of core infrastructure. Personalization, these terms we use, they're not just a layer that happens on top. They're not just a sort of a simple problem to just sort of be sprinkled on. It is really a full stack problem. The entire architecture of the software that we use to develop products and manage them from a marketing perspective. I'm not going to get into the technical details today, but this is what we have to learn to successfully evolve. This is what smart teams like Deezer are putting in the effort to understand. Please stop by our booth, but do your own research as well, because these components are what enable actual software to become agentic. Now, what's also really important is this is not learning from data in the way that so many of us have come to understand happens. Most of the problems in the world, most of the problems with our customers and our businesses are not, the answer is not in some historical data. It is in the person's mind that we're trying to interact with. It is to be discovered as we interact with them. That's how we learn as humans. And in fact, that's how agents have to learn. And so they have to have the capability to efficiently learn, running experiments on our behalf, interacting with each other. Another aspect of agentic infrastructure that's really important to understand. And then the final thing I'll sort of say in terms of context before we really jump into the heart of Deezer's work is that agentic AI does not mean, when we say there's a transition, it doesn't mean that we're in a world where all of the software we've invested in has to go away. It's not a rip and replace. There's so many tools that handle basic management of delivery, pipelines, things like that, that the smartest human would use and the smartest agent can also use. And so the question just becomes, how does agentic be full stack, but also effectively interoperate and integrate with the tools that we've put in place? All right, so now let's talk about Deezer's move into this in a very early way and in a very ambitious way. And I'll pass it over to you, Emma. Introduce us to what CRM means at Deezer. Deezer is, of course, a fantastic way to discover and listen to music, a leading music provider in Europe and the world, headquartered in Paris. Tell us more about marketing at Deezer.
Yeah, hi everyone. So when I joined Deezer, it was a bit more like 2 years ago. I think the CRM function was totally undervalued across the organization. The way teams were perceiving my team and the way my team was acting was very much a support function, kind of like taking the request and like executing like kind of like email executors within the organization. And I obviously knew the value that CRM can bring to a company. So we shifted all of our efforts and energy towards like showcasing the value that CRM can bring to an organization and really using CRM as a lever for growth overall. So I think at this stage, we were pretty much on the yellow part of this chart, and hopefully now we are moving toward higher. Still, the goal is to go full purple, not only because our heart is purple, but because this is where we want to go. But it took us a journey to get there, I have to say. However, it was quite smooth and quick because I knew exactly where I wanted to go. So I had those 3 steps in mind, and we started by the fundamental to me, which was clarifying objectives and aligning the team, not only my team, but the whole organization around the core objective. So as a music streaming platform, we have 2 main focus. The first one, if you want to move to the next slide, it's basically pretty much what we call converting users. So make sure that free users are paying for the service we offer them. So that's kind of like the pink path. And then at the same time, whether a user is free or paying, we need to make sure that they are understanding the value proposition of Deezer, starting to stream with us and establish and maintain this habit over time of like streaming and coming back to Deezer every day. So what we did, we kind of like mapped out our KPIs tree, starting from the North Star, which was growing the full price sub base, and getting down to different levels to kind of like split out this North Star into like sub KPIs. And that way, my team was fully accountable on each branch of the KPIs. So it was really the fundamental steps. Then quickly, we kind of like clarified the vision for the team. It was important for me to like in a very simple, memorable, and actionable way to illustrate, and you have it on the next slide, like what my teams were like thriving into every day. So we did that collectively as a team. And from there, we rebuilt everything, not from scratch, because we had a baseline, but we rebuilt all of foundation. So it was all about hiring the team, upskilling the team, remapping our processes and make them more efficient, streamlining and simplifying our CRM stack into one tool, because we were operating with different tools. And at that time, that's where we started to launch like the basic, I would say, lifecycle pieces and automation. Once this was done, I think we started the fun part, which was all about accelerating what we are doing. So for this, I gave the team 3 main focuses. The first one was automation. Second one was personalization, and then experimentation. So I knew how to make it work because I had the opportunity in my past life to stand up like agile testing process within an organization. So we basically stand up this like feature team, really focus on like how to iteratively accelerate testing and being more nimble on how we test things. And thanks to this, we managed to accelerate everything we are doing. So basically, we started to get more sophisticated in the journey we are doing. So optimizing these existing basic journeys with more personalization, more real-time data, more like action-based triggers. And one path that was super interesting for us is to go beyond the life cycle. So usually when you think about CRM, you think about onboarding, like retention, win back. But there is so many more cycles to explore, and especially the short cycles. So if you think about music, there is plenty, I would say hundreds, not to say thousands cycles to explore. It could be, for instance, creating your playlist. It could be discovering a new album release on a Friday. It could be using a music quiz for the first time. So what we did, we explored all of those loops and build some messaging before, during, and after to go after and with the hope of deepening engagement with all of those loops. So that's basically where we stand today. We have seen like very significant results. So we doubled our contribution on year 1 for year 2, which was quite easy knowing where we were starting from. But then on year 2, same, we doubled again our contribution. And now we are kind of like ready for the next stage. But all of this, I think, won't be able and sustainable if we stay as it is. So the reason why I think we think AI will be a good lever to help us getting to that vision where CRM will be more interactive and adaptive to each individual.
Yeah. It's worth double tapping on that for a minute, because I think the reality is that while every one of our applications, every one of our businesses continues to evolve and there's so many opportunity to create value, I think about the context of music. We interact with it in so many contexts of life. You listen to it when you go for a run. You listen to it while you're sitting at your desk and you're working. You have a small party and you have folks over and you want to curate a particular kind of list. All the time we're trying to discover new music while listening to old music, refreshing memories. There's an emotional element. We use it to get through the difficult parts in our life. And the reality is that most of the time that we're interacting with music and thinking about it, it's not just sitting in the application swiping with our thumbs. And I think historically, sort of when CRM lifecycle, the kind of marketing involves direct communication that's proactive to an end user has been under. I think the situation you found yourself when you joined Deezer it was very common in the sense that it was just sort of seen as a table stakes. It was just sort of seen as a thing you set up. And I think that's very much an artifact of the tools that we were interacting with as a baseline. There's so much more we could do with those tools, but as a baseline, it was very hard to figure out and answer all those questions. It's one thing to have a product that enables a user to come and do something. It's another to realize in a very busy, noisy world where they have Netflix and they have TikTok and they have financial trading apps and so many other ways they could spend their time, to know when and how to interact with them and proactively bring them value is very difficult. But the promise of it is so deep. And so what you did was sort of step in and use the existing tools that you had and generated so much value to kind of hit those returns in year 1 and year 2. So powerful. And then I guess the question just becomes, let's dive into some details. What is that work to be done? And as we talk about some of that work that you did, we'll be able to kind of encapsulate what it means to shift to Agentic. And as you adopt Agentic, how do those workflows shift so you're spending less time on certain kinds of manual tactical decisions? And your team is quite substantial. Maybe say a few words about that as well, because It's a really sophisticated group of people working across so many different aspects. And then we'll talk a little bit how that shifts in a world where you're using agentic tools rather than kind of role-based deterministic tools.
Yeah, I think a good way to kind of like illustrate a little bit more our journeys through like more concrete use case will be to go through our activation journeys. So very briefly, what does it mean? So it's all about the first days when you onboard Deezer. So as said, we have two objectives. The first one is to convert users for free to the premium offer. And then the second one is to encourage users to perform certain behaviors that we know is driving long-term loyalty. So here you have an example on how the data team help us to identify what are those moments within the first weeks of life where you can deepen your engagement. So we have defined like those three setup moments, the haha and the habits. That is like during the first 28 days of life, where we had like specific behavior we wanted to drive. So I think this activation use case was a good use case to kind of like illustrate where we are today and where we want to go. And we picked that one in the very early stage because it was an easy one to showcase our wins. So this is something very tangible, very measurable. And you can basically quickly show value and an uplift on the early stage. So we started with like, I would say, basic journey with like a welcome email, adding a couple of touch points to encourage users to stream during the first day, which was more around the setup and the haha moments. And then a couple of conversion touch points as well. And then step after steps, we get more sophisticated. Indeed, the team is structured in my organization with like very much focused by KPI. So we have one CRM manager that is fully dedicated on their journeys. And then from there, we enrich more this journey step after step. So with more personalization, with more, we extend it basically to the habit moments. So make sure that users are streaming again every week for 4 weeks with like strict approach and gamified approach. We added a more of like action-based triggers within the journey. So for instance, if you didn't perform your haha moments, then one day after we'll push you a nudge to encourage you to add favorites to your playlist, because this is basically the behavior we know that drive long-term engagement. So we basically get more and more sophisticated to reach now to that stage where the journey is getting very sophisticated in a good way and very complex with like multi variations.
Yes. Now, we see some of this content and it makes sense. We basically theorize this sort of abstract concept of a journey. We know kind of like a person becomes introduced to a product and they have a couple of light interactions with it. And then you want them to have a particular interaction that you characterize as an aha moment. And then you want to kind of refer to that as you communicate and bring them back. We're familiar with this concept. But what does it mean in practice? As in, how do you actually implement that in the world that you are operating in? It's a lot of specific tactical decisions, right? Because if you want somebody to be, if you sort of say, send a message, you have to decide exactly how, exactly what to say, exactly when to say it.
Yeah, and for this, you need to know where you want to go and you need to have a lot of data and insights to influence your decision. So as said, my team is structured in a way where you have pretty much one CRM manager on a focus area. And then what she did when she started, it's like, I like to encourage my team to do this. Every time there is an opportunity for us, the opportunity or the objective was to activate users. So what we did, we defined what we call a learning agenda. So what are the big questions you want to answer to reach to your goals? And then from there, we are making hypotheses, like a number of hypotheses and where we need to confirm. And we design a testing plan to answer all of those questions. And what we did, we kind of like size each opportunity, each test, making sure we're starting with the biggest opportunity to make sure we have the strongest impact very quickly. And basically, we had a very pragmatic approach, step by step, with like testing. So we're basically starting with one branch and say, okay, on this branch A, I need to test this, and this. We perform the test. If it works, great, we scale it. If it failed, we iterate it again. So step by step, and it took us like almost like 12 months, I would say, to get to that stage. So it's really much about iteration, testing, failing, winning, and keep doing while still keeping focus on your KPIs. And when you reach your KPIs, that's where you can go to the next stage and the next path.
Yeah, and the lever would be this message versus that message and this test. And tell us more about the limitations of that. it took 12 months to kind of set this up in, let's sort of say, the activation context. It's expensive.
It's expensive on time and capacity most of the time, because even so, Isa, who did this together, is a great CRM manager. It takes a lot of time to just iterate those testing. So I think we have reached a limitation where I feel that we are nearing a plateau in terms of uplifts and what we can generate from this journey and over all the journey we are doing at Deezer. Because there is a lot of, it's like multivariation. Like the trees is like getting bigger and bigger. Yeah. And there is still a lot of questions we want to answer on this learning agenda. The overarching one is what to push to when, to who and when, basically. So the key question are how to balance activation message versus conversion message. What's the best things? Maybe, Paul, for you, it's good to start with like a conversion message, and me, I need to be nudged a little bit and stream more before getting to that stage. Also, how to balance calendar-based touchpoints versus action-based touchpoints, because we are doing both. So basically sending a communication at these three versus like sending a communication when you do a specific behavior. It's a lot about like what type of message resonate more with our users, whether it's like more like testimonial-based or community-based. So there is a lot of questions we still need to answer, and we do think that AI will help us answering those questions faster, and even answering those questions that we will never have been able to answer by yourself, right. Especially thinking about the sequencing.
Yeah, right. So that's the world that that's sort of the best of the best that you could do in the tools, is you kind of test at these broad motions and these broad message levels. What we do as humans is much more quickly iterate, right? We're kind of sort of subconsciously modulating everything about our tone, our expressiveness, the vocabulary used. That's how we communicate as humans. And so when we think about agents being able to do something similar, to actually push the specificity and the precision of the communication, we have to move beyond that kind of like we give one direction. Because speaking on stage here, you can know me, but most of our users, 1 million people in the world, right? We don't know them. And so what Agentic means is to begin to sort of say, what is the technology that's going to break a particular message into pieces very dynamically, very meticulously, kind of keep track of when you give a message, it's really a component message. It's a combined treatment that's broken into how are we referring to the person? What is our value? Are we looking to inspire someone? Or are we looking to comfort them? Are we looking to push sort of to help them remember their past or aspire to a particular future? Are they going through a stressful period or are they going through a joyful period? This is all the context that person is in. And so if we want to interact with them on their level within their context, the agents have to have a way of tracking and modulating those individual pieces. And so that's what agentic infrastructure begins to do. It begins to take those broad-based messages that we used to work with and break them into pieces, and then generate a lot of alternatives. Help us generate a lot of alternatives so that we can continually modulate them at a very micro level. And then all of that embedded within the larger context of, are we sending an email? Are we sending a push notification? Are we sending it at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday or 4 p.m. on a Saturday? All of them becomes this combined engagement decision process. Now, what's really interesting is that because we're not making those tactical decisions about this particular message to this particular static segment, we can begin to think in terms of broader strategic categories, personas that are really built over a large catalog. And that becomes the work that your team begins to do. Instead of those micro decisions, thinking more strategically about the patterns of users, the patterns of behaviors, and then shifting and guiding those. I think probably in streaming and entertainment, there's a lot of constraints that are in place in terms of how you're able to describe a particular artist or particular album, right? It's not just our own product. We're kind of distributing the product that has been developed by some label, some artist. And so when we think about just raw generative AI, the way we use it, where it's produced on demand, that's not necessarily fit for purpose when we're engaging in a process like this. Is that a fair?
True, yeah, it's fair. But what's great with the tool is that you can kind of like manage and put guardrails. So for instance, when it's a very specific campaigns to promote an artist and we have a specific like constraints or requirements from the label of the artist, and most of the time it's like ad hoc campaigns, we can also like set up those guardrails within the tool and say, okay, we need to stick to what we want to do here. However, when it goes to automation, as I was saying, like we're using more and more, I would say, generic copies. Not to say generic in the sense that they still stay super relevant and explicit for users, and we are using like Deezer's tone of voice, which is bold, fresh, and quirky to make it more exciting. However, we are the freedom to test what we want to test, and that's where the tool gives us all of the possibilities to like exceptionally test like multi-variations of the copy we want to do. So
that's right.
That's really the tool already allows us to find the right balance between the two. Work under those constraints.
And that's that earlier interoperability and integrations perspective. We've already invested so much time and effort in the world into describing our product, right? There's so much label description. There's so much artist description. There's so many that's data that's packed into our applications. And what we want to do is make all of that information, that content available to those agents so that they can then manage the tactical decisions of which message goes where. And that's the position you find yourself in. We go from Deezer in a world where there's one activation message on day one to where we generate hundreds of thousands of possible messages on day one. Hundreds of thousands that have been pre-approved. It's not that the agent can say whatever it wants. In a sense, it's very similar as we scale human teams. We interact as humans. You hire 10 people, you hire 100 people, you're really successful. You hire 1,000 people. Those people don't do whatever they want. As people, as employees, we don't do whatever we want, right? We're able to follow guidelines. We're able to kind of follow instructions. Sometimes those instructions are narrow. Sometimes they're broad, right? And then what we rely on is that delegation. We rely on the person to exercise their ability to interact, to learn from what they're seeing, their particular customer. In the agent's context, we're generating an agent for every single user, right? So that agent becomes responsible for observing the user's response and shifting and interacting accordingly, and then being able to report back so that your human team is able to kind of have confidence that everything's operating the way you would expect and want, while you're also learning new things from it. And thinking about this broader content catalog. And instead of just sort of messaging around activation as in activate, as in come back to the app, we can think of all the possible contexts in which we might want to say something about music and make that available as a team. The other thing I wanted to just briefly talk about is the problems of measurement. In a traditional construct, in a traditional rules-based world, you tell it to do one thing, and then you're basically looking, what's the click? Right? What's the immediate effect of that message? What are some of the problems in terms of the limitations of looking beyond just, did they click the message? We're interested in, are they around in 30 days? Are they around in 60 days? What is their experience midweek, right? Tell us more a little bit about that.
So it was a challenge and it's still a challenge. So we have a measurement approach that is very much focused on incrementality. So we'll hold out control group to measure the uplift of what we're creating. It's quite straightforward and easy on the conversion side because it's quite like linear, like black or white. You convert yes, no, you activate yes, no. It gets more tricky when it goes to engagement because I was referring to those loops. This is a recurring behavior that it's really hard to measure over time for a couple of reasons. Like it could be about the subscription models that versus transactional. I think I used to work for transactional model, and I think engagement means also buying something, so it's easier to track. But when it's more subtle with music, as you say, like people, it's like an emotional product. Like it's like a feel good or feel bad instinct when we want to hear music or not. So it's way more complex. But we do believe that with this tool, it will completely simplify the way we want to measure engagement because we'll trust the tools. That the tools will be set up basically to create an uplift on our KPIs. So I think with this, we'll be way more able to quantify the cumulative impact of all of the little things we are doing on engagement and retention.
Yes. And this is a fascinating problem. In fact, 2 weeks ago, I was just at Netflix's office at their annual personalization and experimentation workshop. They run operated by their AI and ML team. And they invite kind of like ML teams from across the industry. And one of the key topics was, how do we measure more effectively at different increments of time? I remember working with a particular streaming app where we saw that agents were able to very effectively drive increases in watch time. Interestingly, in some cases, that watch time was associated with what we as humans would probably recognize as binge watching, right? Where you find something so compelling, you spend the whole weekend watching. There's always these interesting trade-offs. When you go through that experience of binge watching, oftentimes you come out of it, the other side of the tunnel, and you look back and you're not so happy with yourself spending the entire weekend watching the show, right? And so sometimes the effect, on the longer term, increased watch time and then subsequent reduction in watch time, because you're like, I'm not getting back on there. I need to go on a clean purge, right? So then it becomes a business decision, right? How do we allocate and how do we measure? Now that we can measure our longer times, what does that measurement look like? And what are the trade-offs we're making as a business? Last thing, here we go. The last thing is that when we delegate to those agents, what's really powerful is that then we have such clearer, more meticulous measurements that we can do these higher aggregate measurements and learn so much from it. Wrapping up, we'd love to just hear your, a little bit more about your excitement for the future. So much is happening. What's got you excited?
Well, the whole concept, because it was kind of like my dreams coming true. So true story. I flew in late last night because we had a leadership workshop at Deezer. We were kind of like strategic workshops to think through the future of Deezer, what we look like. And obviously AI was a big component of the conversation. And true story, when I was in the workshop, I did remember 2 slides that I had done probably more than a year ago from now, where the first one was how AI can help my team to get more efficient. And the second one, how AI can help us to be more relevant for our users. And those 2 combined, meaning more impact. And if you had told me, Paul, a year from now that all of those possibilities that I've mapped on my slide was doable today, I would have never believed you. So I feel that the technology is mature enough now to make like all of the dreams that I had since like 10 or 15 years as a CRM expert come true. So I think we are all super excited with the team to just showcase like all of the values that CRM can bring, even more than we are doing today.
Amazing. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.